Welcome to tutorial 2 of our 4-part series on sex rights, making sexual and reproductive health and rights a reality. So, I do hope, and in fact I'm sure that you watched the first tutorial. If you didn't, please make time to go back so that you understand where this information comes from. I have entitled this 4-part series, Going Far with Little. And you will understand why. And tutorial 2 is going to talk about strengthening networks for lobbying, advocacy, and accelerated impact. We're going to talk in this tutorial about what we call values and moral ambiguities. My name is Mzi Nduna, and when I'm not teaching students who are enrolled for psychology courses, I work with community-based organizations to bridge the gap between science, theory, and practice. So these values and moral ambiguities, we experience them every day. And what we experience with these values and moral ambiguities is that they are related to stigma. And part of the objectives of the Sex Rights Africa Sexual Reproductive Health work is to shift people so that we lessen stigma towards key populations and vulnerable groups. In tutorial 1, I introduced you to the 3 partners that AFSA worked with, and these partners were KRCC, the GLN, and the Treatment Action Campaign. I'm going to tell you some of the work that they've been doing around stigma. What were the challenges and what were some of the positive shifts that they noticed as a result of the interventions that they delivered around stigma. Remember, in tutorial 1, we describe the interventions that they use. Should you be interested in using similar interventions as well, you can watch tutorial 1. And in terms of organizational values, an organization such as the KRCC, the name says it, it's a KwaZulu-Natal Regional Christian Council. So Christian suggests religious. And when we think about religious organizations, we think conservatism. They are conservative most of the time. And especially when it comes to talking about sex, sexuality, reproductive health, and reproductive rights. They may talk about health, but rights, conservative. However, the KRCC was able to do this in a place called Eshowe and the surroundings in KwaZulu-Natal. And this is what one of their implementing staff members or volunteer had to say about the work of the KRCC when we had a conversation with them as researchers about what does it mean for them to do work around sex and sexuality and reproductive rights as a Christian organization. And he said, because we're a Christian organization, we don't encourage some things. Firstly, our aim is to assist people to be independent. It is to assist people to be able to make decisions on their own. And the participant went on to say, for example, KRCC works with sex workers. And in that area, it's very important that we understand very well that not all of them, the sex workers, that's what they said, are in sex work because they choose to. It is because it is the only option that they have to get money. And so as a Christian network, it is the responsibility of the organization to not judge people who are experiencing stigma already because of the work that they do as sex workers. So this is another example of, or this is one of the examples of moral ambiguities that were shared with us from the work that we do on sexual and reproductive health. And another coordinator in the same organization said that sometimes they do feel conflicted in terms of their sentiments and in terms of their values, especially on topics such as abortion, topics such as same-sex orientation, because sometimes these are experienced and found by some members of the Christian family as unchristian or as sin. So because people think that this is unchristlike, this is a sin, so it creates what they call a values ambiguity and moral ambiguity for them. So how do they get around this? The KwaZulu-Natal Regional Christian Council shared with us that they created platforms whereby people can talk about their differences. The participants that we interviewed who works at KRCC told us that they do not encourage, they do not discourage. They create platforms so that people talk about abortion. So they are not encouraging people to have abortion. They are not discouraging people to not have abortion, because they say what is important is that people should be supported to choose. And once they have made their choice, people should be supported and encouraged to be healthy in their choice. It is not for the council to choose for the people that they work with. So they encourage that people talk about safety, for example, talk about safety in sex work, because there are many reasons why people do sex work. And KRCC, one of the people that we interviewed, said the reason why they encourage safety first is because, as the organization, part of their work in sexual and reproductive health and rights is not to stop people from doing what they are doing. So they cannot stop people, for example, who are engaged in sex work. It's very important for them that when they feel the values conflict, that they clarify for themselves what it means to respect the other person and the other person's opinions and the other person's lifestyle. So the lesson here lies in the answer to the question: how do we deal with the ambiguities and the personal values that clash with our professional work? We interviewed one of the staff at who volunteered at KRCC, and they shared with us that through community dialogues, people are able to talk about what drives them to sex work, and people are able to talk about the risks that are involved in the work that they do. People are able to explain their context from their families, for example. And once they have an understanding of that, then it helps them to separate themselves from the values that they might think they don't agree with. So because their work is about safer communities, it's very important for them to educate the community about not stigmatizing and about not discriminating and about not being violent to sex workers. So it's very important that the communities are educated about how do we not stigmatize, how do we not shame, and why we should not be violent towards sex workers. One of the challenges that KRCC experienced in this work is that because they work with a community that is criminalized, a community that works in the street, they are not always available consistently to attend all the sessions that they have designed for them in the interventions. So they may get some this week, then if they have a follow-up session, they may get a different set of people, because it's not always possible for them to attend. They are not a community that is organized in that way. So this work is not easy. And even after having done this work for a while and having received training from KRCC, from AFSA, from other opportunities through networks, there were people who still felt that they struggled with their own personal values in relation to their professional responsibilities. So, for example, where a person felt that it is bad to be involved in sex work, which is what one of the volunteers said. But then they said, but I'm not judging them. I'm not saying a person who is doing sex work is bad, but I am saying sex work as a profession is bad. And so she stated that she does not communicate her personal values during the intervention, which is something that is important for us to learn from this tutorial. That you might think that this is such a bad idea, sex work is a bad idea, but it's very important that when you do the work, you do not communicate your own personal values during the course of the work. And in terms of the objectives of the organization that you work for, it's very important that, again, you are clear about the objectives of the organization. So, for example, the KRCC took a stance in relation to sex work, that the criminalization of sex work in South Africa was putting sex workers in danger. So that was the stance of the KRCC, that they will continue to work on creating safety in the communities for sex workers, because the fact that sex work is criminalized is what results in the dangers that sex workers experience. And for them, they said, I quote, "You must be in a safe place. you must use the money that you earn from your profession efficiently. And they said that those are the skills that they were imparting on sex workers. Financial literacy, so that people are able to use their income in a right way. They were also imparting sexual and reproductive health information and education and skills, so that sex workers are able to work in a safe space. So that is very important for us. The GLN worked on creating safe space for the queer community. They are based in Maritzburg. We explained this in tutorial 1. They worked with other implementing partners around Umgungundlovu. And what was important for them is that they considered themselves to be activists in the community. Most of the people who worked for the GLM, certainly not all of them, but most of them identify as queer because they work with the queer community. Some of them reported that as a result of the work that GLN has been doing in this community, they had seen stigma being reduced. Some people reported in our study when we were evaluating the project that they saw less stigma. They themselves experienced less stigma. They did not experience discrimination, and that in fact violence in their communities was reported as less often than before the project started to focus on communities with advocacy. We interviewed, I explained this in tutorial 1, people at different levels in different organizations. One of the people that we interviewed at GLN was the director of GLN, and he had this to say. There has been a change in some clinic staff. We work with the clinics, we engage with all the clinics, and they now are beginning to understand the issues. They are being sensitized, and they shift their attitudes towards gay and lesbian people. This was a very important quotation from the director. As part of their MSM work, Men Who Have Sex with Men, he felt that one of the positive effects of their work was that people were now coming to the clinics, because remember, everybody has a right to use our local clinics, but sometimes people don't feel comfortable to use the clinics because of stigma and discrimination, and sometimes outright violence that comes from the workers or the staff at the clinics. But with the work that GLN has been doing in Umgungundlovu and the broader communities, the director shared with us that some of the information that they've collected from their beneficiaries suggests that there has been a positive change. People were accessing health services, and people were starting to also feel free and comfortable to test for HIV, so that they know their status, and so that if they tested positive, they are able to be put in a health and wellness program. And this was one of the objectives of GLN, and they felt that they were achieving this objective. So the positive finding about a welcoming community cannot be taken to mean that members of the LGBTI community are now all of a sudden safe. We know that that is not the case. So that cannot be taken to mean that we have dealt with hate crimes as a society. We know that because also in the work of these organizations, when we're doing the evaluation study, they shared with us that some gay and lesbian, transgender, intersex persons still experienced discrimination and prejudice in their communities. But the worst one was the one that was happening right within their families. One of the staff members from KRCC shared with us that there was quite a few occasions that they received reports of people who were having problems with their own family members, who were sometimes chased away from their homes. And they gave us an example of a recent incident that they were dealing with at the time when we interviewed them. They were dealing with a case of a person from a village known as Nkwalini, which is a nearby community. And this person had even had to move from his village to go and live in the urban, in the townships. And this is what this does. It creates an impression that townships are more accepting and more liberal and more accommodating of the LGBTI community. And in fact, this is not always the case, because we know of human rights violations and hate crimes and murder of the LGBTI persons in the townships themselves. So it is not a safe runaway place anyway. But it's very important that where people are, in the villages, in the suburbs, in the townships, in the farms, wherever people are, they should feel safe. We should be able to tackle homophobia. And this is one of the things that the organizations, all three of the partners of AFSA, were tackling. Homophobia was one of the areas of stigma that they were tackling. Again, it's not easy because sometimes it conflicts with personal values, and that is what we're talking about in this tutorial, that when it conflicts with personal values, it's important that people receive training and information to be able to deal with the subject matter. One of the things that our participants from Pietermaritzburg shared was their concern about high rates of crime in the areas and the townships around Pietermaritzburg. And when they talked about this crime, they spoke about crime that is fueled by substance use and is mostly perpetrated by young people. And it is mostly perpetrated by young people, including young men, as the main perpetrators of these crimes. Now, the problem with these crimes is that GLN, for example, reported this as if it is general crime. But when a person who identifies as gay or lesbian, for example, is attacked in the township, how do we know that that was general crime or robbery and it was not a hate crime specifically? So it's very important that we collect enough information about these kinds of crimes so that we are able to tell if they are motivated by prejudice, if they are motivated by people who don't accept diversity and differences in sexual orientation and gender identity. So values clarification, it's important because once you've clarified that, even as a volunteer or a staff, you are able to tell the difference between what looks like a general crime and a crime that is perpetrated because the motivation was hate. And it's very important that we document hate crimes as hate crimes. We report them to the police as hate crimes. Yes, there may not be a particular crime category called hate crime, but it's very important that we bring it to the attention of the justice system that there is social injustice that is happening because the crimes are not part of the general crimes, but they are hate crimes. So, on a lighter note, again, in relation to work around LGBTI, we spoke about work around sex work and abortion from KRCC. They also worked on LGBTI as well. And again, their staff, their volunteers, and their associates, that's what they told us, do not need to prove that they are Christians to work for the KRCC. And because they don't have to prove that they are Christians to work for KRCC, that means that KRCC has a mixed group of people, but also their beneficiaries are not necessarily Christians. They are a mixed group of people. And what they found to be important was that even though people might identify as Christians, there may be differences in the way in which they interpret the scripture, in which they interpret the Bible. And so those differences in the ways in which they interpret the Bible sometimes result in these tensions and conflicts between people's personal and professional beliefs. And that is what the KRCC was working on. So in terms of all of these areas, be it abortion, be it sex work, be it LGBTI, all these areas that are found to be contentious when they are discussed in community dialogues, it's very important that staff members receive adequate training so that they are able to separate their personal beliefs from their professional beliefs. And we're doing this so that we can create a safer community for everyone. Respect is important. We need to respect choices that different people make. So thank you for watching tutorial 1. And we spoke also about the strengthening of networks so that if your organization is not strong on tackling a particular issue because they feel that it is confidential or they feel that it is controversial, they feel that it is taboo, they don't want to get into that space, it's very important that they partner with the other organizations. And this is the way in which AIDS Foundation of South Africa worked by bringing together the people into one network so that they can continue to share. And last but not least, please remember the book that came out of this work. It is called A Magnifying Glass and a Fine-Tooth Comb, Understanding Girls and Young Women's Sexual Vulnerability. It is published through a grant that was received from the Center for the Study of AIDS and Gender, University of Pretoria. So it is freely available for you. You can download it online. It contains more information that is part of the findings from this sexual and reproductive health, making sexual and reproductive health rights a reality project. Thank you, and look forward to Touch 3. It's coming. Please watch tutorial 3.